So welcome, everybody. I'm Brian Curry. I'm a member of the Black Graduates Students Association and an MBA student. This is a panel on addressing anti-Blackness through collective action. Today, we have Black student associations and initiatives that propose ways to expose and challenge anti-Blackness across the university while delineating how to mobilize and sustain collective action against systemic racism. I'd like to present the Black education students. So Eki, Benjamin, and Jane are currently graduate students in the Faculty of Education at the University of Alberta. They are all members of the Black Students in Education Collective in their facility.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eki, and I'm currently a master's student in the Department of Educational Psychology at the University of Alberta. I will be starting off our collective, and then I'll pass it on to Ben and Jane. So I'll just introduce to you all our calls to action. And we came together as a collective last June in response to the ongoing injustices, particularly in the United States and Canada, that were going on towards Black people. So we came together to demand change within our faculty at an institutional level. We wanted to extend efforts beyond protest and use our positioning as upcoming academics and as scholars in the university to demand systemic change in education. So we raised a series of 10 calls to action, and we brought it straight to the dean's office. So we didn't go through committees or panels, we went straight to the higher ups. So our first call to action was for more visibility of Black History Month events. So we demanded for at least one faculty event yearly for Black History Month, open to staff and students. And this was in response to the lack of Black History Month events or the invisibility of Black History Month events within our faculty. And luckily, this year we had a series of events within our faculty, so that was one success for us. Our second call to action was about mandatory anti-oppression training for faculty, staff, and students with a specific component on anti-Black racism. So we noticed that with EDI and with anti-oppression training, it tends to be watered down and anti-Black racism tends not to be focused on. So we wanted a specific component, very clear component about anti-Black racism facilitated by community members, so someone within the Black community, because we value lived experience perspectives and we think it's important for that voice to be there. Our third call to action had to do with Black and non-Indigenous students building relationships with Indigenous students. So we are currently working on trying to collaborate with Indigenous students and faculty within our faculty. Our fourth call to action was for faculty level orientation for students with specific supports and resources for Black, Indigenous, and students within the international cohort in secondary education. A lot of our work is focused on Black students because anti-Black racism requires specific attention, but a lot of our work is also intersectional. We recognize that Indigenous students face a lot of similar barriers that we face as Black students. International Black students also face barriers that they've expressed. We want to adequately address all these concerns. Our fifth call to action had to do with a Black Studies course or certificate, and luckily our deans have been very supportive in agreeing to advocate for this within our new college system. Our sixth call to action was for a specific scholarship fund for Black students administered by the faculty. So we noticed that there are ethno-specific scholarships within our faculty for other groups based on ethnicity or culture, and we believe that it's important to have one for Black students, just based off of the barriers that Black students face in financing our education, whether it's at the undergraduate or graduate level. And we have been lucky to have our deans actually work towards this. So they have started fundraising, which is great news for our collective. Our seventh call to action was for improved recruitment, visibility, and representation of Black students. Given that we have historically been shut out of academic spaces due to anti-Black racism, we want to improve our visibility in this institution. Our eighth call to action was for a new Black faculty member who centers Black scholarship and pedagogy. And this was to be in response to the Black faculty members that we have lost in our faculty. So we want there to be an increase in Black faculty members to provide teaching, scholarship, research, and mentorship. Our ninth call to action is to implement a systematic process for consistent collection of race-based data. So we live in a data-driven society, and a lot of decisions are made with data, and we believe that we need to have race-based, disaggregated race-based data to help support our calls, support our needs, and to support our demand for equity-based supports. Our last call to action is to have a confidential and accessible process for students, faculty, and staff to report racism within our faculty. And this is to make it easier for cases of racism to be known by our dean's office and those who can take action, and to also signal to our faculty that anti-Black racism has no place within our faculty or university. So that's a synopsis of our calls to action. And I will now pass it off to Jane and Ben.
Thank you, everyone. Where we get an opportunity to talk about and to address anti-Black racism at our institution of learning. I was tasked today to talk about a few incidents that students have experienced and what can be done to have a relatively normal experience at university. One such incident that I would like to share with you was about a nursing student who was supposed to complete her internship as part of her degree in nursing. And whenever she went into the hospital, hospital's patient's room, some of the patients would say that they don't want her to enter the room because she was Black, and she therefore could not complete the practicum that she needed to complete her bachelor's degree. And so she kept explaining this to the professor, and the professor could not listen, and she just thought that maybe she was making it up. And so she kept going, and the professor actually failed her twice. And in the end, she had to find an alternative hospital for her to complete her practicum. And for a student who pays international school fees, the onus is on the university to provide access for students and to have a fair learning experience. It's good for us to bring such examples forward, because these are real examples that Black students experience regularly, if not on a daily basis. Another incident is more personal, is about my daughter when she was completing her bachelor's degree in math and physics with art as her minor. She wanted to do portraits, to paint portraits of Black women, because she realized there was a gap of portraits of Black women in the academy. Her professor told her that she could not paint Black women, as there have not been many artists who have painted portraits of Black women. And in fact, one of her classmates told her that why doesn't she paint portraits of slaves? And my daughter insisted that she will be painting portraits of Black women. And in fact, her father had to write a letter to the professor trying to explain that this is a learning institution, and therefore students should be free to do something that they think they are called to do. And the last item that I would like to address is what the university's duty to accommodate policy. The policy has a narrow definition of racism. It defines racism under a form of harassment, and I'm going to quote. It says harassment can include bullying, sexual harassment, and racial harassment, and is a form of aggression that may include physical, verbal, or emotional abuse. The policy goes on to elaborate on racial harassment as unwanted comments, conduct, or behavior about an individual or a group that focuses on their race, ethnicity, origin, or religion. As you can see, racism is not clearly defined. And if we don't define racism, we portray racism as something that's not harmful, that can easily be washed away. If somebody calls you the N-word in the hallway, somebody can just apologize and say, I'm sorry. However, if the university does not deal with racial incidents that Black people experience appropriately, then they are bound to occur in the future. And in terms of mediation done by the university, when cases of racism occur, there is underrepresentation of Black people or BIPOC in general, which means that in the mediation meetings, there are hardly any BIPOC people who actually have experienced racism or marginalization. And therefore, how can you expect objectivity in a mediation when there is no representation? It's my suggestion to address some of the issues, that there should be resources and tools in the department that Black students can access. For example, an anti-Black racism reporting unit where they can get assistance in situations such as the above that I've named. And also recruiting and retaining Black faculty who have gone through some of these racial incidents is key in creating a fair learning environment for Black students. In the education policy, we had 2 professors who left, and unfortunately, we haven't yet gotten somebody to replace them. So just to tie in with the call to action that was brought up last year, recruiting and retaining of Black faculty is quite crucial. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. I would like to dive into my part of the presentation, which is focused basically on how to sustain the movement. So it's common knowledge to all of us here that across the country and across much of North America, following the recent civil uprising, there has been a lot of social justice revival, if you like. And some of those movements are happening not just in the education faculty of the University of Alberta, but in other faculties and other universities. My challenge and the angle I'm coming from is, how do we sustain it? Because it is very likely that the fire will die maybe after a year or after 2 years, or after you are graduated from your faculty, after some of the staff that are also championing the current movement have left. And so it's important for us to be very strategic, or what I call stragmatic, not just thinking about the present, but also thinking about the future. So being pragmatic and strategic at the same time. In thinking beyond the moment, we need to be very creative in how we develop relationships that will outlive our time in the faculty and in the university, so that this calls to action will not just be thrown into the dustbin when some of the leading champions of the movement are no longer in the institution. And in order to do that, we need to think about relationships with staff, relationships with our peers, as well as relationships with those that are coming in after us, and make sure that there is a strong network of people that understand the vision, believe in the vision, and have a plan to make sure that the vision continues to be implemented, that the calls to action continue to remain on the radar, and we continue to monitor the implementation and put pressure, on policymakers, on leaders, in order to make sure that these things are not just put on the shelf, but they actually translate into reality for the future. We need to adopt that generational thinking at least 2 generations beyond where you are, so that your movement in your department, in your faculty, in your university far outlives your current activities. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. That was awesome, and that was a lot of great information. Yusuf is a 3rd-year medical student at the University of Alberta. He is originally from Toronto, where he completed his Bachelor of Science and Master of Science in Medical Science at the University of Toronto. He is part of the Black Medical Students Association that was founded in 2019. Since then, the BMSA has been working on improving representation of Black students within medicine.
My name's Yusuf. I'm a 3rd-year medical student, and I'm part of the Black Medical Students Association that was formed back in 2019. I'll just be talking about some of the changes we've started to implement in the Faculty of Medicine in terms of addressing racial disparities. And a lot of these changes stemmed from our calls to actions this past summer. So this is our team right now. So Ibrahim, he's a year 2 student, and he's our president. We also have Ruth, Chiame, and Fasayo, who are 1st-year students now, who are also taking on a big role. And then some of the original members of the BMSA are Addie, Annalika, and myself. So just to give you guys a little bit of context, Black students within the MD program make up about 1.2% of the student body. And this compares to Black Canadians making up about 5.9% of the population in Canada. So there's a clear need for Black medical students and Black doctors, and these numbers are very similar across Canada as well. There's also a legacy of racism against Black Canadians in terms of getting into medical school. For example, if you look at the bottom, the University of Toronto, McGill, Dalhousie, and Queen's all had policies up until 1965 that excluded Black students from being admitted to medical school. And this included nursing and other health programs as well. We know that there's systemic racism and that Black students are underrepresented in medicine, but how do they feel about it? So when applying to medical school, Black students often state that there's a lack of visibility in interviews. You don't often see Black interviewers, doctors, or other students. There's a fear of discussing their experiences during the interview. There's like inappropriate jokes and stuff about affirmative action and how, getting into med school is easy because you're Black and, there's some sort of, special quota involved. There are mental health aspects in terms of being isolated and often being the only Black student in the faculty in your class. And then there's also a lack of platform to share your lived experiences safely. Furthermore, in terms of professional development and support, there's a lack of diverse faculty to gain opportunities and move up. There's a lack of mentorship opportunities, which is really big. One of the biggest aspects actually is the curriculum, and this is something we're trying to work on. There's a lot of instances of prejudice and racism and inappropriate terminology within the medical curriculum. Sometimes there's racial profiling in clinical cases that kind of exclude Black people versus other groups of people. And then there's also the fear of being mistreated in rural settings. One of the big things with University of Alberta is getting a rural experience. And a lot of Black students and persons of color are afraid to go to those rural settings for fear of racism and incidents, right? So the Faculty of Medicine has a diversity statement, like all faculties. We just want to focus on some of the key wording. So they want to endorse equitable opportunities, decision-making and advancement and improved outcomes. This not only includes Black students, but just all populations as well. We want diversity and equity and inclusion at all levels, including employment, medical education, as well as delivery of care to our patients. So last summer, we released our calls to action to address some of the racial disparities within the Faculty of Medicine. Our calls to action focused on several key areas: curriculum, wellness, community engagement, student governance, and admissions. So I'll talk about each of these different categories, but curriculum, wellness, and admissions are three areas that I think we've been able to make the most progress. So I'll focus on those. In terms of curriculum, we've proposed numerous changes in the curriculum that provide skill-based learning and training in terms of cultural safety, anti-racism, and human rights. So at the pre-clerkship level, which is the first couple of years of med school where you do mostly lectures and things like that, we've included amendments to all the course blocks, including physicianship and discovery learning. And these two areas are areas where there's a lot of different cases and clinical opportunities for students to discuss different social aspects of medicine as well. So we wanted to include BIPOC experiences in those as well. And we also proposed changes to different course blocks within medicine, like cardiology, dermatology, et cetera. And dermatology is a big one. So last summer, I worked with Dr. Yu, who's our course coordinator for dermatology. And we worked on including images of darker skinned individuals throughout the dermatology curriculum and how these different diseases can present differently in dark skinned individuals. Because one area of medicine where students and doctors are really poor at is identifying different skin conditions in persons of color. So we put in a bunch of images and learning objectives and test questions to make sure that students early on in their medical training are getting these opportunities to recognize these conditions in darker skinned individuals. And in terms of clerkship, which is the last 2 years of med school, where you do a lot of clinical work in the hospitals and in rural settings, one of the main things we did is a cultural safety workshop or anti-racism workshop. And Annalika and Addie were primarily responsible for that. And we worked with Doctors Lewis and Goldstein from the Office of Advocacy and Wellness. So we had several anti-racism workshops given to not only the third-year students, but the fourth-year students, as well as in the future, we're going to be sending out these anti-racism workshops to different faculties within medicine. In particular, Department of Surgery has expressed some interest. In terms of wellness, one of the main things we did is the anti-racism book club, which is still going on. So Annalika is responsible for that. And every couple of weeks, the Anti-Racism Book Club reads a different book on racism, white privilege, and how this kind of intersects with the healthcare system. And we've had good turnout, and it's been a big success. Community engagement is another big area. So we've worked closely with the Calgary Black Medical Student Association, the University of Toronto Black Medical Student Association, as well as the Black Physicians of Canada. We've worked closely with Black community leaders, such as the Africa Center and the Black Canadian Women in Alberta. We've worked with community members in terms of patients and non-medical professionals. And then we've also collaborated with Black student organizations, such as the BSA, BGSA, et cetera, at the University of Alberta. Admissions, I think, is one area that we've made a lot of progress in, and I want to focus on this a lot. We had two main initiatives that we proposed, and one was a Black Canadian Admissions Working Group. So this is essentially a group that will focus on improving representation of Black students within the medical program. And then the way we're going to do this is the Black applicant admission process, which is a separate, well, it's not separate, but it's just an additional component of the application that Black students can fill out just to gain a little bit more recognition. I just want to make note of this number. So before we did this program, we have 7 medical students within the entire medical school. So within the Black Canadian Admission Working Group, the goal essentially is to increase efforts in the outreach to and recruitment of Black Canadian students, and to increase the number of Black Canadian students at the University of Alberta. This is our current working group. So we have Black faculty physicians. We have Dr. Mapior and Dr. Zuenga. She's an anesthesiologist, and Dr. Mapior is a head of general surgery, actually. We have allied health professionals like Dr. Bukola Salami, who spoke earlier, who's helped us a lot. We have community leaders like Emmanuel Ona from the Africa Center. We have residents like Dr. Dominic Moutier. We have BMSA representatives, and then we have individuals from the Faculty of Medicine, such as the Assistant Dean of Diversity, Dr. Gaur Shankar, as well as other notable guests like Dr. Goaz, Dr. Hillier, and Dr. Konkin, who are all well established within the University of Alberta in terms of diversity initiatives. These are the individuals that were involved. And again, like I mentioned, these were some of our goals in terms of outreach, recruitment, being involved in the application program, as well as supporting Black medical students once they get accepted. So the main way we did this is we implemented the Black Applicant Admission Program, BAP. So essentially this program is an optional stream for students who identify as Black. They have to meet all the same requirements in terms of GPA, MCAT, course prerequisites, and it is not a quota program. The only thing they have to do is just self-identify as Black and then have an additional essay, about 250 words, highlighting why they chose to apply through the stream. They also participate in the interview with the general MD applicant cohort. So there's no difference in terms of any of their qualifications or who they're being interviewed by. One of the things we also did is we included Black physicians and community members this time in the file review process. And these individuals were chosen by the Black Canadian Admission Working Group that we've established. Essentially, all of these Black file reviewers were responsible for reviewing not only Black students, but also the general student population as well, just to reduce any chance of any bias. Essentially, what we've done is we've included a certain percentage of Black file reviewers that will hopefully level the playing field a little bit. Luckily, through some hard work, a lot of file review, this year we have 24 Black students who received interviews. So this is a big jump from previous years. Like, as I mentioned before, we only had 7 Black medical students in the entire program of all 4 years. And now we have 24 Black students interviewing for 1 year. And hopefully the majority of them get in, or all of them actually. So this is a big step forward. And this is something we're going to continue to work on to help increase representation of Black students within the Faculty of Medicine, so it's more representative of the Canadian population. And then lastly, another thing we talked about in our calls to action was having a Black health lead. We envisioned a Black health lead as a Black doctor within the Faculty of Medicine who kind of holds the department accountable in terms of initiating anti-racism changes, incorporating Black health into the curriculum, things like that. Because as students, we only have so much influence, but to have a Black doctor within the Faculty of Medicine in a leadership position is going to be great moving forward. Dr. Iniola Salami was announced as the Black Health Lead last week. She received her MD from the University of Alberta in 2018, and then she also completed her residency in family medicine at the University of Alberta as well. So we're really excited to have her in the faculty, and she's really looking forward to helping bring about a lot of the changes we talked about in our calls to action. Here's our email, bmsa.uofa@gmail.com. If you have any questions, just email us and we'll be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Yusuf. That was a great presentation. Definitely learning a lot about what's going on in the med department. So our next guests are the University of Alberta's Black Students Association. Founded in 2018, the University of Alberta's Black Students Association is a student group that strives to empower and promote community interaction among all Black students at the University of Alberta, with the goal of fostering student development. The Black Students Association's objective is to create a network of supportive members who connect culturally, socially, and contribute to one another's success academically. Their aim is not only to provide a safe environment for Black students, one that invites all University of Alberta students to discuss issues affecting the Black community, as well as aiming to encourage them to become more aware and involved with the movement of overcoming social, economic, and racial inequalities in our world. I'm very happy to welcome Celine Caruso-Dixon and Kevin Mpunga.
So hi everyone, my name is Celine Caruso-Dixon. I am a third-year political science student with a certificate in international learning. I am the current president for the UABSA, and I am so proud of the current team that we have going. We've done a lot of amazing work this year, despite the challenges of COVID. I'm also the COO for Latinx NL, which is a local Afro-Latin based community group. We do a lot of events for Latin and Black-based peoples. And I am the founder of Zion, which is a minority-based open mic series that specializes in poetry, performance art, and music. And we really focus on youth-based stuff. So we go into high schools, junior highs, and we are going into prisons.
My resume is not as extensive as Celine's, but I'm in my third year of my bilingual nursing degree. At the U of A. I'm the vice president of the Black Students Association. I've been here this is my second term now. And I also co-founded and currently I'm the CEO of Elev. It's a local startups here in Edmonton, helping connect students with off-campus housing for the duration of their academic careers.
So the Black Students Association is a student group that was founded in the fall of 2018. And then we became active in winter of 2019. Our founding mandate was to empower and promote the community interaction among all Black students at the University of Alberta. With the goal of fostering student development, the UABSA's objective is to create a network of supportive members who connect culturally, socially, and contribute to one another's success academically.
Now, since our inception about 2 years ago, we've held over 30 different events, from panel discussions, art showcases, debate nights, and to our iconic Black History Month galas. Though most events were a success, each one of them had something in common. They were all rooted in ideas that came from our executive team. And we felt that we should be doing things differently, that the ideas behind our events came not from ourselves, but directly from our members. We launched an inquiry. We wanted to get an understanding of the barriers that Black students face, what their needs are, and what kind of opportunities they're looking for, and identify trends and patterns. Now, these would then directly inform us on what kind of events to hold and what kind of services to offer. In this presentation, we'll share with you some key things that we learned, what we were able to do as a result, and of course, what we believe there is left to do. And we will then conclude with some recommendations for your organizations, perhaps, or you as individuals that we believe may be helpful to you as well.
So first up is mental health. The figures on the screen are upsetting to say the least. Less than half of all students say that they have a generally healthy mental health, and just over half agree to have inadequate access to mental health resources. Out of those who say they did not have adequate access to such resources, their top limiting factor was cultural stigma, unfamiliarity with existing resources, and financial limitations. We wanted to focus on two key aspects: arming students with ways to improve their mental health and to open up the conversation that could help reduce the cultural stigma about the topic. We had a mindfulness and meditation workshop to teach helpful techniques and ways to manage stress and burnout, and how to incorporate healthy mental health habits into our lives, which was a massive success. We also dedicated one of our Black Like series entirely on mental health. We invited regular, everyday Black students to talk about the challenges they face and share their experiences with their fellow students in an open and safe environment. Of course, there's still plenty of work to be done. Black students need to be better informed on what resources are available so that they know where to go. Family members need to be involved in mental health conversations so we can reduce the stigma within our family systems. And finally, the financial barrier to mental health access have to be addressed. One thing that all students have in common is that they are all looking for or will soon be looking for jobs. This area was not at all flowers and rainbows. Only half of students think they have great job prospects in their field, the other half worrying about the outlook of their future career. Just over half find it easy to identify work opportunities, and the other half is struggling to figure out where to look. And most shocking, almost half of the respondents say that their career choices have been limited by upbringing, i.e. parents telling them they gotta be doctors, lawyers, engineers, or risk becoming a failure. Students feel restrained in those areas, seldom exploring opportunities elsewhere. We wanted to help students have a better shot at landing a job or internships, so we started by the obvious path, improving their resumes. We worked with Intuit Canada to help students understand what recruiters are looking for and how to better sell themselves on 2 pages. The event was so popular and well received that we went a step further. Again, working with Intuit to not only bring them more help with their resumes, but also coach to become better interviewees. This event also helps students in learning how and where to look for jobs. One of the biggest tasks left to do is orient students to the abundance of career paths available, so they don't feel like they have to choose between African parent trifecta or failure. We also gotta do a better job in creating networking opportunities with folks in those industries and connecting students with valuable figures like recruiters and career advisors.
Now, related to jobs and career, and everyone's most probably least favorite topic is money. Again, we have some shocking figures. Although the majority of students say they have a good understanding of their finances, only 45% report being in good financial situation. And 64% of students report student loans being their largest financial burden. And with 40% saying they have over $10,000 or more in student loans. Now, keep in mind that most of respondents were 21 or under. So most of these students who answered to our surveys, will, by the time they finish their schooling, they will have far more than the $10,000 mentioned. Last year, we had partnered with RBC to hold the event called More Money, Less Problems. This event was to teach students how to budget for the present and for the future, and how to properly use credit to improve their financial situation. Now, this is one area that we as a student group really need to work harder on. We need to direct students to alternative ways to finance their educations other than loans. We need to hold more workshops to teach them how to perhaps increase the amount of income streams they have and implement a sound financial plan. And we need to find ways to educate them on available student loan repayment options. And one thing that we're actually working on right now is to be able to provide the micro grants to help students cover educational expenses. Next, technology, business, and entrepreneurship. This is where we really saw a big contrast between interest and access. 63% of students are interested in business and entrepreneurship, but only 36 say they have adequate access to resources and information. Likewise, 55% say they're interested in technology, particularly AI, but only 33% say they have adequate access to resources and information. Now, the ELITE program is a massive project that was started last summer by Dr. Andre McDonald. It's a collaboration between several faculties at the University of Alberta, multiple school districts, large corporations, and countless of community organizations, and with the support of the Canadian government. Now, the ELITE program is an 8 to 16-week paid internship program for students 15 to 22 years old. So this includes high school students, where students are matched with community partners, either professors or companies, to learn and work on awesome STEM projects, anywhere from biorobotics to software engineer to city infrastructure, and even brain-computer interfaces. And students don't necessarily need to have related experience or knowledge as they're trained on the job. And there's also an entrepreneurship and leadership training component as part of this program. And this is where I try to sell this program a bit more. The applications are currently open. So if you're between 15 and 22 years old, currently going to school, please visit eliteprogram.ca for more information. Now, you may see a pattern emerging in the thing we have left to do and that we have said so far. Students simply need to be represented not represented, but presented with better opportunities to learn about the awesome fields and career paths that are available.
For the sake of time, we won't go into too many details about all the other areas that need to be touched on, but here's a quick overview. Students are looking for more and better volunteer opportunities. And although not many are currently involved in student governance, many more want to become involved in it. There are a lot of skills necessary for not only careers, but life in general that Black students want to improve, like time management, negotiation, and communication. And although over 60% of students say they have adequate academic support, under half say they're doing well in school. Why is that? How can we improve such resources? Additionally, many students are interested in research, and 45% are interested in leading and conducting research. So how can we direct them? Who do they need to be connected to?
Overall, this inquiry was very helpful for us in setting our direction and our priorities. I'm sure you've been able to pick us on some trends, but here's the top 3 things that we say that we learned from this. The first is that there is no unanimous answers. Though we're all Black, we don't all have the same needs or answers. That may seem obvious, but it can be overlooked sometimes, student groups, as we try to plan things. Second, there is a big lack of awareness of existing resources. Now, we're not sure if this is specific to Black students, but it does seem that students aren't aware of everything that's available to them that is already in place, anywhere from mental health to starting businesses. Bridging that information gap has become the list priority for us. And lastly, like we said at the beginning, we're holding dozens of events, but not many of them have had lasting impact on students' lives. And with the sort of information that we've been able to gather and will continue to gather, we believe that we'll be able to better serve our members by directly addressing their needs. Finally, we wanted to leave you with 3 recommendations. The first is to not fall for the trap of thinking, perhaps because you're Black, that means that you know or can understand what other or most people want or need. And we really suggest that you cut down on the amount of assumptions that you make, not only as individuals, but also as student group or as organizations, and instead focus on basing your efforts on tangible information and data. Second, you have to track your progress or else you will never know whether what you're doing is moving the needle at all. This is something that us at the BSA, we're not very well at the moment. But, again, it's one of the things that we want to focus on moving forward. And lastly, there's only so much you can do, especially in a limited time mandate or a tenure. You can try and do a little bit of everything or pick 2 to 3 things that you want to do really well in and go hard on those. Now, we suggest that you may perhaps do this every semester or every year, up to you, but you've really got to pick your battles.
Attached here on the screen, you can see where you can connect with us. So we have our website at uabsa.ca. We have our Instagram at uabsa, and of course our email, bsauofa@ualberta.ca.
Thank you, Celine and Kevin. Really appreciate that. I know as an undergrad, this group was not around when I was undergrad, so it's great to see that the sense of community in the Black undergrads is alive and well. So our final presenter is Evelyn Isidu. And Evelyn is a native of Brampton, Ontario. In 2013, she received her honors Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from Western University. That same year, she moved to Edmonton to pursue her doctoral studies. Her thesis work aimed to identify chemicals in oil sands, wastewater, and understand how long these chemicals take to degrade. Her volunteer activities are centered around environmental sustainability and the promotion of diversity in science. Last summer, Evelyn published an article called Canadian Universities Must Collect Race-Based Data. Speaking to her experience as a Black female graduate student, Evelyn defended her PhD thesis in October 2020. She also is a member of the Edmonton Safety and Wellbeing Task Force. So everyone, welcome Evelyn.
So my talk is a little bit different. I'm speaking from a graduate student perspective, and eventually we'll be leading to a project which I'll be starting. I'm going to lead us through a series of questions that speak to my experience and a few anecdotes which help to give further depth to those experiences. Most people don't know what grad school is, to be honest. People within the academy will say it's a place to ask novel questions and develop ideas and, things that sound quite powerful. Other people say it's a place for nerds. Parents might say it's a place where people go when they don't want to work or start in the real world. And all of those are kind of true because none of us really know what it is. I know that when I started grad school myself, I wasn't exactly aware of what I was getting into, but I was very excited. Celine had mentioned the trifecta, the African parent trifecta. And so earlier on in my undergraduate studies, I realized that I didn't want to be a doctor, which was very disorienting and alarming for me because scientist was not necessarily on that list. But I did know that I was and still am a curious person. I like to ask questions. And in my fourth year of my undergraduate degree, I did a thesis project, which allowed me to get some experience of what research is actually like. So I thought, I'll try graduate school. It'll be similar to my undergrad thesis. We'll come up with some questions, do an experiment, and then poof, I'll get my PhD, which shows you how ignorant I was. didn't take a couple months, we'll say that. So that speaks to what grad school is. But what about who is grad school, or who are the people in grad school? So that's, I think, a more important question. So we can think about it in ways such as, whose theories are we studying? Who's developing principles and practices? Who are the lecturers? Who are the department chairs? Who are the founders of, academic institutions? Who are the researchers, and who are the students? And so I'm a chemist by trade. I did my undergraduate in chemistry, as Brian mentioned. And so part of why I love chemistry is because it's very systematic. And coming into graduate school, I focused on the objectivity of science. So that is the clear-cut approach to answering questions about the truth. When I look a little bit in more depth, we think, and I realize we're taught by certain principles and rules and laws. So a lot of those have namesakes, so people after whom or after which they've been named. So there's things like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. There's the Henderson-Hasselbalch law, which describes how acids and bases work. And there's the Le Chatelier's principle, which talks about equilibrium. This is all stuff that's STEM, boring, doesn't matter, but you can notice that these names all kind of sound like they're from one particular area of the world. Speaking closer to home, as Brian mentioned, I did my PhD in oil sands toxicology. So oil sands being an important resource here in Alberta, they are a mixture of oil and sand. And in almost every paper that you read, environmental chemistry paper that you read about the oil sands, it talks about the Clark caustic process. So just bear with me a little bit. I swear this will be the last bit of science that I talk about today. So the Clark caustic process essentially is a way to separate oil from sand. It was developed in the 1920s by Dr. Carl Clark and around 1926. And so it was a huge breakthrough in improving the separation efficiency and one of the major innovations in the field. And it was patented, and the research was conducted at the University of Alberta. So that's, where many of us here in this room go. And so every time I read a paper, it's Carl Clark, but it's like, but who else, right? Like, who else is contributing to this research? Who else was present during that time? So I asked that question and trying to lead us to thinking about context. So, even though I entered into grad school focused on the specific questions of science, science doesn't exist in a vacuum, it exists within a framework or within institutions. And so in terms of context, I'll just read a few points from Dr. Melinda Smith. It's a short paper on equity rights and human rights milestones in Canada and specifically in Alberta. And some of these were spoken to earlier, I think, by Yusuf, for example. So if you think about timeline, in 1911, officials in Edmonton, so that's the city where the University of Alberta is, had voted to ban Blacks from the city. And in 1924, Black people were not allowed in pools or in public parks. So when we think about that time frame, early 1900s, around the same time as Dr. Carl Clark, Black people were not even allowed in many public spaces. So when we're thinking about people who are contributing to research and the legacies created by different types of people, we're talking about a truncated timeline in terms of who has been able to contribute, specifically Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color. And Yusuf also had mentioned that segregation in schools has just ended, or had just ended in the 60s. And so that doesn't seem that far away, but that's within the timelines of, you know, some of our parents or grandparents. So not that far away. And so while I have always been driven by the objectivity of science, you know, it was really kind of interesting to consider the timeline and context in terms of when Dr. Carl Clark, this person I read about all the time, when he existed, and just knowing that, you know, I would not have been able to conduct research alongside him at that time. So when you think about who are the students, part of why we're all here in this room is because, you know, many of us are the only ones in the room. So in terms of who are the student, most students in graduate school do not look like me. They do not look like the people in this room. And that's partially because, you know, academia was built as an institution to benefit certain peoples. And you know, only until recently has it been acknowledged that that institution was not built to benefit Black people. And in many ways was built to directly exclude Black people. So just trying to bring us back from historical context to present day, I'll just give a few anecdotes. So, you know, graduate school it's very busy, you know, besides research, you got to do courses and presentations. And as a scientist, you're often in the lab. So I was in the lab lots. And I remember one day, I think it was I want to say it's like between second and third year, I just started my research, and I was in the Cates lab, which is where my lab was. And I was taking the elevator, I think, up from the lab to the student office, and a prominent researcher came into the elevator with me, and, you know, he stands really close to me, and he like touches one of my braids. He says, "This is beautiful. You know, how did they do that?" And, you know, he was within, you know, arm's reach. You know, the fact that he could touch my hair shows, you know, the lack of personal space in that situation. And of course, I didn't do anything. What do? You can't slap a researcher. Like, obviously no one cares about who I am. So I you know, just even trying to react in that moment, it was really, really a lot. So I just kind of smiled and laughed, and, you know, allowed that to move on. So that speaks to a lack of personal space. And also, you know, am I a pet? I don't think so. You know, you don't just touch anybody's hair. So that's one anecdote. Second anecdote, so Jane had spoken to, you know, instances of racism. What does that look like? So while that might have been a subtle instance within the first few weeks that I moved to Edmonton, I was walking down White Ave because, you know, didn't really know many people. White Ave is one of the busier streets here in Edmonton, where there's lots of shops and food and festivals that happen during the summer, which is when I moved in 2013. It was this summer. And I remember waiting on a corner, it was White Ave and I think it was 105. And, you know, a car passes by and screams out, "Nigger!" like very loud, very prominent as they pass me by. And I will never forget that moment, because, you know, how can you? First few weeks in a new place, and that sense of panic, that sense of that lack of safety is not something that leaves you ever. And so why I bring these two stories side by side is because part of the Black experience is that, you know, your Blackness does not stop once you're off campus. It's with us all the time. And part of being in the institution is, you know, racism happens all around us all the time. And it's very challenging. And so while we're on campus, it feels like, I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but for myself, it felt like I'm always on display. You always have to be on. And it's because you are not only trying to prove yourself as a young researcher, but you're also oftentimes representing many people who aren't in the room, people who you haven't met and people who you'll never meet, because for many on campus, they have never interacted with a Black person and quite frankly, don't know how to. And so there's a lot of pressure that comes with that. It is, you know, as much an intellectual journey, graduate school is as a, you know, emotional and a psychological journey, which is very laborious and in some cases damaging. So, you know, many of us have said in our presentations here today, the Black experience is not unique. I will repeat that because of course we are not a monolith, and, you know, while my PhD experience was very challenging, there are many who have had much smoother processes, much smoother graduate degrees, and I hope that becomes more of the norm. But for the time being, that challenge of always trying to be on, always trying to be the best, it takes a lot out of a person, and it requires some kind of double think. So certain instances, it becomes challenging to decipher, is this happening because of me, or is this happening because of my race? So it's like when you're in a group meeting and you are being spoken over, or you are among your peers and maybe you're being judged more critically, or maybe you are having multiple clashes with your supervisor, some of which may not even be due to research. And, then where do you turn? That becomes a question. How do I deal with this? And is this because of me or because of my race? And all of that leads to the feeling of, am I supposed to be here? So imposter syndrome is a thing which I feel many academics experience, irrespective of their race. But all of this becomes quite heightened when you are a minority or a person of color, specifically a Black person at the University of Alberta. So when I wrote my piece in Maclean's, it was shortly after the events of last summer, and I called for race-based data because facts and numbers, as a scientist, are reassuring. And in a university which is based on the premise of teaching and learning, numbers are invaluable. So that's was essentially the point of my paper, or of the article, but also talking about what it feels like to be the only one. And after writing that, it was really overwhelming and interesting, because I received emails from students, postdocs, deans, and in one case, even a president. And these are all Black people who validated and reassured me that the feelings which I mentioned in the article were not just exclusive to me. And so just to demonstrate that while we're not all the same, a lot of us in these academic spaces are faced with more challenges, especially as you go from undergraduate to the higher ranks of academia. So, an undergraduate, you can see, I'm so proud of the BSA. You can see they're doing lots, and there are a lot of Black undergraduate students, and I'm happy to see that. And what I would like to see is more Black students and Black academics at higher levels of the academy. And so I think that universities are finally at a point where they're starting to acknowledge that there are issues on campus, and acknowledge that anti-Black racism does exist. It's not a thing that, I've made up in my head. Not that anybody has said that, but it can feel that way. And so this is all leading to the point that representation does matter. It matters at all levels of the academy. We want to see more Black faculty, staff. We want to see more Black provosts. We want to see more Black presidents. Representation matters. One quote I heard yesterday at a meeting was, proximity brings care and distance breeds fear. So what does that mean? It means the more diversity, the more Black people we have on campus, the more that the university at large can become familiar with how to interact with Black people. And not only that, the university itself benefits from having Black minds on campus, because of course, Black people are brilliant. We just are. Everybody, everybody in the room knows it. Let me just say it. We're great. So that's part of one of the points I want to make. PhD isn't all bad. I think that it is an experience which allows you to look into yourself. It took me 7 years. Grad school can take, and hopefully does take for all of you who later go into grad school, hopefully it takes less than that. But there are feelings of shame, guilt, frustration, pride, joy, kinship. There's lots of politics, Dr. Pakola said. And these all sound like elements of a movie, but these are parts of what academia is. And so while I've told you part of my story, the project which I am starting this March, so just in a few weeks here, is called The Good and Bad of Black Grad. And so this is a webinar series which will be funded by the Canadian Association of Graduate Studies, with the intent to highlight the stories of Black students, Black graduate students from across the country. And so we are going to be covering themes, many of which have been mentioned here today. So from being the only one to the power of representation, mental health strategies, support and mentorship, and perhaps even speaking about different professional paths. So first episode will be on March 25th. We'll be starting our social media campaign next week, I think. And so please tell all your friends, family. I will be the host and I'm the executive producer. And so Good and Bad of Black Grad will be starting very soon. And I hope that you will join us.
Thanks, Evelyn. Thank all the panelists that spoke today. I do have a question for the panelists, especially for the ones that are kind of in the grad school area. As a lot of Black individuals, when they're kids, they get the talk, from their parents saying, you have to work hard, or you have to be perfect, or you have to work harder than everyone else. For those of you who've had that feeling when you're working in grad school or med school or even the undergrads, what have you had that feeling being like the only Black person in your cohort, and what type of pressure and what type of feelings do you have when you have to go through that, where you have to feel that you have to be perfect or work harder than everyone else? Anybody can jump in on that one.
I don't mind sharing my experience. I haven't even told you the full depth of the experience. That will come out eventually when I get my diploma in hand. That's a thing that many Black academics, Black professionals have here and kind of used to propel themselves. You got to be perfect. You got to be the best. You got to be better than everyone else. And when I've told that to non-Black colleagues, often I'm told, I'm sorry that you grew up that way. In some ways, I appreciate that push from my parents, because it's a hard truth. Honestly, I'd rather I mean, who knows, but I appreciate knowing that because of racism, you can't slip up. The other side of that is the psychological burden. I am not perfect. I mean, I'm, a pretty good student, but I don't know everything, and I am not the best at everything. And that was part of the challenge in undergrad, is just knowing, I'm not an A+ person. Like, who will I be? And so what am I saying? It's basically, it's a double-edged sword. It is information, which I think is useful, but it's also painful and can be psychologically challenging, because to live up to that standard of perfection obviously is impossible. No one's perfect. So that's what I'll say about that.
I completely agree with Evelyn. I was very lucky though, because my mom was always someone who was said that, but at the same time was also very supportive in whatever I wanted to do. She believed that in being Afro-Latin, we took up a very unique space that not many people had the opportunity to take up. And so whatever I wanted to be in, no matter if it was academics, if it was on the police force for whatever reason, if it was the army, I don't know why these ones were the ones that came up, but they were, I would succeed, and I should succeed regardless of the institution that I'm part of or in. Even if I don't want to do any of that and I just want to sit at home and be a video gamer, she was like, as long as you succeed in that area and as long as it makes you happy, that's all that really matters. But recognize that institutional racism, systematic racism is a thing, and recognize the history behind it and how you can overcome that history and prove those people who maintained that for so many years wrong. And so it was more of proving people wrong, not necessarily people of today, because I don't think many non-Black people and non-Afro-Latin people recognize the longstanding history of racism as much as Black people do and as much as Latin people do, but recognizing that the people who are dead, who put these things in place, they need to see you succeed, because now they're rolling over in their grave type of deal. So my mother is very petty, but we love it.
I remember while being on the campus, especially in the faculty, they have the pictures that line the corridors. I remember spending one morning going systematically from wall to wall to wall to wall to try and identify the Black students in each of those photographs. And I also remember in the classes, the curricula and stuff. So I'm particularly drawn to your number 8 in the call to action, the need for you said more Black scholarship, but I actually want to ask about Black scholarship that is also non-North American. I want to know, did you put forward this call to action already? What was the dean or the president's response to that? And how was that received? And what about the idea of seeing non-North American? Because I know we have Black scholarship in some of the courses that I've done, but they've all been North American scholarship. So, just wanted to ask the education students about that.
Actually, this is a call that we are still working on with the deans. And at first there was some hesitation to even address the call, given the cuts to the university and, the budget cuts, and using that as an excuse not to address this call. But luckily, the dean's office took it to the provost office at the university. There has been some action to actually approve it and to go on with the process of hiring a Black faculty member within our faculty. So as it stands now, the only information that we really have is that there is a lookout for a member who specializes in EDI and Black mental health. And we're still in conversation about that new member, but we have received advice to look into having someone perhaps from the diaspora, so like an African faculty member or Caribbean faculty member, to bring that knowledge, to bring Afrocentric knowledge into our faculty and into education. So yeah, that is something that we are still in conversation with, but there hasn't been any concrete hiring just yet.
So that concludes our panel. So I'd like to thank all the panelists for giving presentations and great anecdotes, stories, and data. We are going to be taken to the main room where the ambassador will be giving some remarks.